welcome to the stage, John Livesay.
Whoever told the best story is the one that would get the sale.
I wasn't thinking about the sales. I was thinking about my personal happiness.
We're really the movie directors of our own life, and we can yell cut at any time and change the story we're telling ourselves. I think most people not telling enough stories. If you're bored, so's the audience. People buy energy. Money is literally energy in action.
Do you think that some stories should die for the new ones to be born? John Livesay spent 15 years in advertising. He's an author of 4 books on storytelling. He's a keynote speaker and an award-winning salesperson. I read John's book, The Sales is in the Tail, and I wanted to kick off this season with a conversation so dear to me. Storytelling is something that I'm personally passionate about and something that I use on my day-to-day basis while selling Belkins. I see so many companies underappreciating the storytelling. So I wanted to have this conversation with John, not just on the storytelling, but also on the self-confidence that comes after, happiness, personal and professional growth. So if you're passionate about your personal and professional growth, like John and I, then you will find yourself relating to our conversation. Thank you and enjoy the episode. John, you've written the Sales in the Tail book about the importance of storytelling. Why this topic has become so important to you?
Well, storytelling has always been something that's important to me through my entire sales career. When I was selling advertising for Condé Nast, I remember Lexus saying, we looked at 15 different magazines. We've narrowed it down to 5. We're going to let you all come in and present, but we're only going to pick 3. And don't talk about numbers. And half of the reps were deer in headlights. And I realized that whoever told the best story is the one that would get the sale. So I started incorporating storytelling into my career many years ago and refining it and learning it as a skill. And so I decided I wanted to write a business fable about storytelling, so through the lens of a story.
Would you say that storytelling is your mission then?
My mission is to help as many people as possible get off what I call the self-esteem roller coaster. When you only feel good about yourself if your numbers are up and things are going great, and bad about yourself if you're not making your quota or whatever else is going on in your life. And the lens that I use is storytelling to help people get off that self-esteem roller coaster, because we're really the movie directors of our own life. And we can yell cut at any time and change the story we're telling ourselves and not get our identity confused with the outcomes that are happening.
What was the turning point for you of thinking about the storytelling, going in that direction? Was that the time you started in advertising? Was it later down the road? Just to kind of help me understand, what was the transition moment for you realizing that storytelling has been this impactful part of your life that affected your confidence, affected the happiness, affected basically the way you produce your own story?
Well, before I sold advertising for Condé Nast, I worked for an ad agency creating commercials for movies that were coming out on home video back in the day when Blockbuster was on every corner. And we could take a movie that hadn't done well in the movie theaters and reposition it for home video. And that's when I really learned that the power of storytelling to get people to buy something was crucial. And I majored in advertising because I've always been fascinated by what makes something memorable, what persuades people. And even the shortest 30-second commercial during the Super Bowl, for example, tells a little story that tugs at heartstrings. And when you have that emotional connection, that's when people buy.
Something that I personally found fascinating by listening to your book, I was still listening to this and reflecting on myself and reflecting also on Ben, right? One of the main characters of the book. And for me, it was a lot about finding yourself, about creating your own self-confidence, and sort of understanding what is happiness for me. It's interesting because the book is about how to increase your sales quota, right? How to it's about sales. It's about it's about utilizing storytelling as the method to produce results for your business, for yourself as a sales leader. But at the same time, I wasn't thinking about the sales. I was thinking about my personal happiness.
Wonderful.
So why you took that angle? Like why you created Ben to be more about self-finding, sort of like self growth rather than business-wise. So because I would feel like that specific part of or the entire book is it's a novel, right? It's like a story about the character, and you see how the character is growing throughout the book.
Correct.
But I wouldn't call it as especially for me, as the standard business literature, right? As if you had like, hey, this is what you do A to Z 4 or 5, right? So can you talk to me about what you were thinking in your head while kind of creating that, and then why you took the angle like that?
Well, I thought it would be a lot more entertaining for the reader to go on a journey. And if you learn how to tell a story that other people see themselves in, and it sounds like that's what happened to you in the book, which is great, then you've pulled them into the story. And if they want the methodology, I give the methodology at the end of the book. So you're learning without realizing you're learning when you go through the business fable experience. And it's a lot more entertaining, which is what the whole point of telling a story is in the first place. So there's lots of levels as to why it was presented in that format.
So essentially, like, storytelling is one of the ways for self-confidence, you would say, correct?
Yes. In fact, I have a whole technique in there where I have people write down 2 or 3 times in their life when they knew they nailed something, whether it's getting a job or getting a second date. And you write down those moments of certainty and you stack them like an air traffic controller stacks airplanes. And we write them down when I conduct workshops. And then you write down the feeling. I felt proud. I felt happy. I felt exhilarated. And that's what you put in your head before you go on a new sales call or an interview. The positive moments of certainty from the past to remind yourself of the truth of who you are, so you don't let the fear thoughts or the I'm not good enough thoughts take over.
So whenever I'm looking at one of my guys in the team, like one of salespeople, I always look at them as characters in their own story and how they're developing. But the point is that not many people have their life as stories, right? So they sometimes feel that they're stuck. Sometimes they feel like they don't know what the next step for them, like even considering the Ben in the story, right? Like he was in a certain loop of like just going and going and going. And then there was someone like, like a mentor or someone that helped them, right? So I wanted to know, did you have someone like that in your moment of truth? And who was that? And so like, what was that time in your life and why you needed that person?
Well, when I wrote my first book over 15 years ago, a gentleman named Tim Sanders had written a book called Love is the Killer App. And I read that book and reached out to him and told him how much I loved it. And then when I was working on one of my books, he offered to write the foreword to it. And that was a big confirmation that somebody at that level that I respected, he was a chief solutions officer at Yahoo, was validating my message by writing not just a little blurb on the book, but the foreword to it. And so I think we all have many mentors in our lives. And I was fortunate enough to have Tim Sanders as one. And I think when you're telling a story, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they try to make themselves the hero of the story. And the most important thing you can do is to make yourself a Sherpa helping somebody climb Mount Everest, or Yoda in Star Wars. You're really that mentor to the client. And so if you're telling a story of a medical salesperson in my book, then I want other people who are in that industry to see themselves in that story and say, oh, that person sounds a lot like me. And I see myself in this story, and John's the Sherpa teaching me how to tell better stories instead of just pushing out numbers and facts, which aren't working anymore. And so that is the experience of telling the right story to the right person at the right time. So you need more than one story to tell because typically you have different kinds of clients. For example, if you're selling real estate, you have a young married couple buying their first house. You might have a couple getting a divorce. You might have an elderly couple retiring and needing to downscale. So you tell each of those people a different story that they see themselves in and want to hire you as their real estate agent to help them on that journey. So once you understand that you need a story, then you have to realize, oh, I need multiple stories, kind of like a playlist has multiple songs. I need multiple stories in my head, depending on who I'm talking to.
So what would you say would be the right approach with regards to creating the stories that people can relate to? Is it like collaborating with others to building the library, or it's best to start off with a few stories of your own that you can test, A/B test, and then sort of like implement, and then based on that create the whole library?
I think you can use other people's stories if they have a story that fits the kind of person that you're talking to. And I think what's important would be to understand the structure of what makes a good case story instead of a case study. So let's give everybody an example. I remember working with a tech company and they said, oh, we have this equipment that makes surgeries go 30% faster. And we tell that to doctors and it's so logical, we just don't understand why they're not buying it instantly. And I said, well, people buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. So I asked some questions and we crafted this case story that sounds like this. Imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was down in Long Beach Memorial using our equipment 6 months ago, and that he could go out to the patient's family an hour earlier than expected. And if you've ever waited for someone you love to come out of surgery, you know every minute feels like an hour. And the doctor comes out and says to the patient's family, good news, the scope shows they don't have cancer. They're going to be fine. And then turns to the rep and says, you know, this is why I became a doctor, for moments like this. So now that rep tells that case story to another doctor at another hospital who sees himself in the story. And the other doctors typically say, you know what? That's why I became a doctor. I want your equipment too. So the story has 4 parts. The exposition. You got to paint that picture, the who, what, where, when, how long ago. Then you describe the problem. And in this case, the problem is it's the patient's family having to wait. And the better you describe the problem, the more people think you have the third step, which is the solution. And then the secret sauce to any good story is the resolution. What is life like after the solution? So if that story ended with the doctor saying good news is they're going to be fine, it wouldn't be as powerful. But the resolution to that story is the dialogue of the doctor saying to the rep, this is why I became a doctor. So once you understand that storytelling has 4 parts to it, and you can practice and making sure that all 4 parts are a part of your story, then you can start getting feedback from your coworkers and saying, was it clear? Was it concise? Was it compelling? And they're like, oh, it wasn't really clear here. Can you make that a little clearer? I didn't understand what you meant. Or was it concise enough that somebody could remember it and repeat it? Yeah. Or you could shorten it up here. And was it compelling? Did you feel anything? The client said, oh, God, that gives us chills, that story. Not only are we not telling a story, it never occurred to us to make a patient's family a character in that story. So that's the element of and the magic of a case story in action.
A lot of founders, including myself, whenever we're pitching our services, we always start with a story because it's very personal to us, right? We talk about the company or the service always to the customer from the standpoint of how we built this, or what was the inception, or why we have things like this, right? But it's very, I've seen the same approach happening only with the salespeople that either have been with the company for a while and they know all in and outs, or they have this personal connection to a company with regards to they understand the mission, they understand the values, and they kind of know the information that is not typically added to the onboarding process. So let me give you an example. We can make product or service personal if we have some kind of personal connection to a mission or to value of the company. But it becomes hard or harder every day to do that because we work from homes. We are not connected to who we work with. We usually are just meeting on the Zoom calls. So from your experience, what you've seen right now, is there still enough storytelling? Is storytelling is something that a lot of companies can do, or because of where we are right now with being very effective, being very agenda driven, with being, just very hands-on things, but do we still create enough stories, especially in the business environment?
Well, I think most people not telling enough stories. They don't realize the people need the stories to have the emotional connection. It's really our soft skills that make us strong. Storytelling, listening, and empathy. When you have all three of those legs of the stool in conjunction together, that's when you have the emotional connection, and that's what drives people to decide. Otherwise, you're just seen as a commodity. If you're just agenda-driven and numbers-driven, and you're just going through the motions, and there's no interesting, compelling reason, people just will go, okay, well, I guess who was the cheapest? So I think you need your own personal story of origin, how you got into whatever it is you're selling. How'd you become an architect, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it is. Then you need the company story, even if it's just a one-person company. How'd you come up with the name? What are the values of the company? And how does that relate to the company's values you're talking to? And then you need the case story. So when most people skip the first two stories and maybe just go into a case study, and you're really missing out, and you're going to lose sales to people who tell all three stories in one presentation. I can give you an example. I was working with an architecture firm, and I said, tell me a personal story of how you became an architect, because you're going to talk about that on the team slide where they have all the architects' pictures and backgrounds of if you hire us versus the other firm, this is who you'd be working with. And one of the women said, when I was a little girl, most of my girlfriends would beg their parents to take them to Disneyland or Disney World to see Minnie Mouse. I begged my parents to take me downtown to see skyscrapers. What a charming little story. Yes. And so I've always been fascinated by this. And that's how I became an artist. One guy says, when I was 11 years old, I played with Legos. Now I have a son that's 11. I play with Legos with him. I'm still passionate about this. So those little story of origins really connect. And it's a much better way to establish rapport than just talking about sports or the weather. Because then you ask the client, what's your story of origin?
Right. You've mentioned in the book that there is a difference between elevator pitch and elevator story.
Yes.
So what is that? What is the...
Well, let's decide right here and now, Michael, we're going to kill the elevator pitch, okay? It's officially dead as right now on your show. Boom. RIP. Nobody's going to miss it. Elevator pitches are boring, they're robotic, and everybody forgets them. So we're turning it into an elevator story. And it's got 5 steps, easy steps. The first one is literally just the phrase, you know how. You know how this summer in Austin, Texas, it's hotter than ever. That's how people talk to friends. So when you start that first step with, you know how, and the second step is you describe who you help. And then the third step is what problem they have. And then the fourth step is you say what you do. And then the fifth step is what is life like for them after they bought your product or hired you? Because the whole goal of an elevator story is to intrigue people enough to go, wow, Michael, that's interesting. Tell me more. And you have a conversation as opposed to a 10-minute monologue as an elevator pitch. So my elevator story sounds like this. You know how there's so many companies in tech and healthcare that are so tired of coming in second place when they pitch against competitors? And as if that's not bad enough, after they present, people forget what they've said. So I'm known as the pitch whisperer, and they bring me in as their sales keynote speaker to teach them how to tell stories that tug at heartstrings that create emotional connections. And after my talk and workshops, they all become revenue rock stars and start winning new business pitches, pitch after pitch, without feeling pushy. There's all of those steps in one place. People are like, wait, what's a pitch whisperer? I know what a horse whisperer is. I even know what a dog whisperer is. I've planted seeds in that little elevator story that intrigue people to want to know more and ask me a question.
When I read that in the book, I was fascinated by not realizing that you can use the same approach in your personal life, even when you make an introduction of yourself. And I especially like the part where you ask the question, what do you do? And I always answer, hey, I'm in IT. That's it. Right? But it's so boring, right? It doesn't
Yeah,
create a conversation.
It doesn't intrigue anybody. It's not memorable. It's not specific enough. And like most people do. What do? I'm a lawyer. I'm a doctor. I'm a sales rep. I'm a this. I'm a that. I'm a speaker. Whatever. But you see, with my steps, you don't even get to what you do until step 4. So you paint that picture. You know how, and then you describe who you help. Who do you help in IT? Who's your ideal client? Let's craft your elevator story right now. Who would you say is your ideal client?
So I work with head of marketing, head of sales, let's say, guys that are running sales or marketing teams.
For what kind of companies?
So we work with the startups to mid-sized companies up to 500, 700 people.
Okay. And what is the biggest problem these marketing people are having?
They need to generate more leads. So they need to generate more sales, and they either don't know how, or they just tried and it didn't work for them. So they're looking for someone that have experience with that.
And what's your company's name?
It's Belkins.
Belkins, you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you come up with that name for the company?
So here's the story of coming up with the name. So 2016, me and my partner started a company, or had to start because we were laid off. We didn't have money to pay for the rent. So we were like, okay, we need to come up with something because no good reputable company can employ us. So we say, okay, here's what we can do. We know how to do that. We have experience in this and we're kind of pretty good at that. So why don't we kind of put together some kind of shop? But we only had a few $100 of investment, or sort of like savings that we could spend on this. So my partner back then, he had because we were of a generation who grew up on playing computer games, right?
Yep.
He had a computer game account, and then he had this nickname, and he had this website when he was kind of just selling out some sweet shots on Amazon. And he's like, okay, I will just take down the website. I rebrand it, and then we're going to host it on the same name. And I was like, Vlad, Belkins is the worst name for lead generation agency ever, because there are like lead feeder, lead berry, lead magnet.
You have the word lead in it.
Leadware. And then this is Belkins, and it's like a squirrel because it's a squirrel logo. And he was like, yeah, it's going to work fine. And it actually worked really fine for us because we were standing out, right? Because people were browsing through the list and they were like,
got it.
Okay, so we have a lot of lead companies and this is just the squirrel. So
nice.
What the hell,
all right?
Right?
So here's what I would suggest as a starting thing. The next time somebody says, what do you do? Instead of saying I'm in IT, you would say, you know how there are so many heads of marketing, whether they're working at a startup or working for a bigger company, that they're under so much pressure to generate leads. And they either don't know how to do it, or worse yet, they've tried something and it's failed and they're worried about losing their job. So what we do at Belkins, in fact, our logo is even a squirrel, is we're like that squirrel, and we help them go find all the nuts, and we never stop. And after working with us, the marketing people get better sleep. They're not waking up in the middle of the night panic that they might get fired, because they've got us in their corner getting them more leads, which generates more sales.
Right. I mean, this is much better than telling that I'm in IT and I'm like in sales.
And see how I took the squirrel and made it a visual, and everyone can imagine a squirrel going and hunting for nuts, and made it an analogy for hunting for leads.
I have this quote from your book. People like to work with passionate people because then the process is fun.
Exactly.
Right? So would you say that a person can improve passion when kind of working on storytelling, or sort of like thinking about the storytelling?
Well, I tell people, if you're bored, so's the audience. People buy energy. Money is literally energy in action. From a metaphysical standpoint, quantum physics, all that, it's all energy. And at the end of the day, that's what people are buying, is your energy. I remember when I was up for a speaking gig, and it was between me and 2 other speakers, and they interviewed each of us on a Zoom call. And then I got the email from my speaking agent going, oh, congrats, they picked you. They liked your energy. And rarely is it that blatant and obvious. So when I was talking to them after they hired me, I said, oh, I saw that you liked my energy. She said, yeah, I just felt so good after talking to you. I figured you could make the whole ballroom full of 500, 700 salespeople feel that good too. And that's what we want. We want them to feel motivated and energized, and then they're going to learn a skill of storytelling on top of it to generate more sales. It was a slam dunk.
Can you speak about your routine? I mean, being always on top of your game, being always passionate about what you do, always energetic, be able to share the energy is obviously energy consuming, right? Like you need to recharge your batteries. So, what is the recharging like for you?
Well, I don't sleep with my phone. I tell people, got to put that in another room. Because the minute you let your phone dictate your life, you're responding, you're reacting, you're not. So my whole thing is, what are 5 things I'm grateful for every morning that happened the day before? And then I set my intention for what I want to do that day. What impact can I have? I was thinking about that this morning, getting ready for this podcast interview with you. And I thought, Michael's put so much effort and thought into what questions. He's read my book. Let's really make sure that I'm at my A game and bring my A game to this interview. I'm also I have a dog that I like to walk and take outside and be in nature. And I think that's really key, is to get movement and be aware of the surroundings. Since I bring my phone on those walks to take pictures, not to answer emails, because that also helps me stay really in the moment. Because the only place there's any peace of mind is in the present. If we're worried about what somebody said to us that hurt our feelings or our sale we didn't get, that's just reliving the past. Or we're anxious about the future. Oh, am I going to make my quota? Am I going to make my numbers? Am I going to meet somebody? Whatever your issue is, right? There's no peace of mind there either. So the more present I become, and for me, that's taking a walk with my dog and taking some pictures sometimes of, oh God, look at that flower. Look at that sunset, whatever it is. So between gratitude and being outside in nature, those are 2 things I do to recharge myself.
Yeah, these are the small things, right? Interesting. I know a lot of my friends are doing meditation, they're doing yoga, they're doing exercise just to be in that kind of present moment. But you don't even necessarily need to go that far, right? You just can do a walk with the dog and just be in the moment.
That's an open eye meditation when you're looking at a sunset.
Interesting. I've mentioned this already to you, that when I was reading the book or listening to it, actually, I was always thinking about the main character, Ben, being unhappy with himself, with his life, with his achievement, and just searching for himself, right? So how important is happiness to you personally and in your life, and just generally the topic of happiness?
Life's too short to stay in a job or a relationship, whether it's personal or not, a boss you don't like. It's just, I think we're put on here on earth for a purpose, and it's our job to find that purpose and bring meaning to whatever it is we are doing. So whatever you're doing, even if you go, this isn't my purpose, well then figure out what your purpose is. But whatever you are doing, do it as well as you can. If you're serving coffee at a Starbucks, be the friendliest, most cheerful barista possible, and someone might see that and go, I want that energy in my company, and offer you a job. You can't wait until you're in the perfect relationship to be loving. You can't wait till you're in the perfect sales job and have the perfect territory and have the perfect product at the best price to be happy. It's a choice. Like, I choose to be happy now with what is, and otherwise, you live your life, as soon as this happens, I'll be happy. As soon as I get this fancy car, this house, this relationship, this promotion, and you're missing out on life. Because guess what? Once you get those things, you still won't be happy. You'll still be going, well, then I need something else to be happy. So it's a real sort of internal job to go, I got to be happy now. If my plane gets canceled, I got to be happy or delayed, right? At least I get to do what I'm wanting to do. If I'm on a sales trip to give a talk, one of the jokes they say in the speaking industry is, we speak for free, they pay us to travel, because of all the delays and crying babies and bad hotel rooms and noisy room, whatever it is. But you have to love what you're doing so much that you feel like you're being of service to the audience, that you will deal with all the other things. But if you hate your job and you're working for a company and they're flying you around and you're making sales calls and you're not passionate about the product, then of course everything makes you unhappy.
Do you think that being unhappy makes us also comparing ourselves to one another? It's like always having Instagram, Facebook, watching and So then the question about the business side of things, do you think it's fair to compare salespeople and just rank them and always say, hey,
yeah.
John is more hit more revenue. So here's the ladder. Look at the ladder. So what role, is it fair to compare or it's not?
Well, I can tell you it's a kiss of death if you do it to yourself. I was hired to speak at a Coca-Cola summit, and they give a nice brochure of all the speakers' backgrounds. And I'm reading about all the other speakers, and I found myself comparing myself to those other speakers. And I was like, oh, they went to Harvard. They went to this school. I went to a very nice university, but it wasn't Harvard. I wrote a book. It wasn't on the New York Times bestseller list like their book. And I went down this imposter syndrome trigger. And I had to talk myself out of it. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm on this stage for a reason. I deserve to be here. Do I care where somebody went to school or how many books they sold when I'm listening to a speaker? No. I care about how they make me feel or what I learned from listening to them. And so comparing yourself to other people is the gateway to the imposter syndrome. And also, you never know what else is going on in that person's life. Everyone's got their own story, their own movie, if you will, right? And you might think you want that movie. You've got your own story and your own things that somebody else would love to have your life at certain moments. And there's always going to be somebody younger, thinner, richer, more famous, more whatever than you. You got a bigger private jet, whatever your level is. And so I think when you stop looking outside of yourself for your own self-esteem, your own sense of happiness, then you're free from all that comparison. Now, whether a company decides they want to rank their salespeople, I won Salesperson of the Year at Condé Nast, and there was 400 salespeople around the world. So I know what that feels like. But I've also been on the other end when I'm not having a good quarter. But again, that's where I went. My mission is to help people get off that self-esteem roller coaster. I'm still the same person, whether I'm getting laid off or winning an award. And that is really what helps you from being free, that you're not tying your self-identity and self-worth to whatever's going on.
What role does the reconfirmation or confirmation from outside plays in sort of like in the personal happiness? Because throughout the book, I was always thinking about Ben looking for confirmation from Carl, from Diane, from someone. He needed the confirmation, like, hey, yes. Am I a good guy? Am I successful? Right? I just think that so many of us are looking for reconfirmation every day. Like, am I receiving enough likes on Facebook? Yes. Right? Like, did my manager tell me that I'm a good salesperson or not? Am I not getting the feedback? I had so many people coming into me and say, Michael, we are not receiving enough feedback. But if I'm giving the feedback, I always say, hey, we're getting too much negative feedback. Can you tell us that we're like, give us more positive, give us that we are good, etc. So I feel like more and more people are just looking for that reconfirmation. Why is that? And is that right? Is that you need to look for that?
Well, it's like an actor saying, I don't read my reviews. Because if I read all the positive reviews about my performance in a movie or a play, I have to read all the negative reviews and believe all of them. As opposed to, I'm an artist who creates a painting or a movie, and I'm not attached to whether I would be great if you like it, but my identity is not tied into it. And so it all goes back to working on yourself of who I am is enough. And I know that internally, and therefore, if you like me, great. If you don't, that's okay too. It doesn't affect my sense of identity, my confidence. And now, if you're trying to sell something and no one's buying it, you can look at going, maybe I'm not telling the right story, but I'm still not confusing that no with a personal rejection. Think of it like when you're at a stoplight, whether you're driving or in an Uber, right? Nobody takes that personally, do they? Like, oh, I can't believe I hit a red light. How dare they turn red when I'm driving? And yet when we get a red light in our career, we take that personally. So the goal is to be as impersonal and impartial to the red lights in our career and in our personal life as we are when we're driving that car. That's just part of the journey. We're going to get red lights. Doesn't mean I have to suddenly question my value as a person or anything else. And from that place, you can still be motivated to improve yourself in your skill set, but you're not doing it with the goal of, I need all this validation, and that's why I'm doing it. Versus, I already feel enough and whole and complete, but I'm also open to self-improvement. So therefore, I'm going to work on that, and hopefully it'll come, but I'm not attached to have it come today or tomorrow or even next week or next month. That's really where the challenge has been for me, is the patience. Like, but you know, when you plant a seed, you don't dig it up. You're baking a cake, you don't keep opening the oven. Is it up? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? And yet we're so impatient with our own self-growth. So just plant the seeds, trust the process. Remember that who you are is enough and bigger than anything outside of yourself.
Great point about being patient. I see so many people these days are not patient enough with their career specifically. And I feel like this is a reaction to a stress. Yeah. So when there is an outside stress and something is not working for them, the first reaction is to change whole thing, right? Like, I wanted to change it. And the changing the job is exactly. And it's not my profession. I'm too bored. It's not working for me. I'm burned out. And there's this term, burned out. I'm burned out. I don't want to sell this product. And I always relate to myself thinking about how the hell I can be burned out about what I'm doing if I know that I should do this or want to do that for the next 30, 40 years to actually be successful in this, right? Because it's a series of book. It's not just one chapter or two chapters, right? Yeah. And that's why, like, you can be physically tired. You can be not in the mood. You can want it to change the scenery. You can go and whatever, but you cannot like be burned out or not motivated. Because, like, are you not motivated living or something? So I was thinking, the question for you is, have you had moments like that in your life? And when? Was it career related or your personal related when you kind of said, like, you know what, I don't want that?
Of course, I've had those moments. I think everyone has those moments where you have self-doubt. You think, when I first started my first book, I thought, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. And had I known how much work it was to write a book, I don't know that I would have written one. But I'm already more than halfway done, so I'm not going to stop now. And, you know, my parents were very much like, you can try something. You wanted to play the French horn, you want to join the swim team, but you got to stick with it for at least a year. Those were the rules. So when I learned that, it's not always easy, and the first time I want to quit something or give up or go, this is hard, I've heard people say, if it was easy, everybody would do it. Mm-hmm. Right? If it was easy to be a professional speaker, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that are doing it. But there'd be a lot more people doing it if it was, quote, easy. It may look easy. I remember sometimes I get off stage, people go, oh my God, you're a natural. And I used to go, you don't realize the amount of work and training and practice I've had. Now I just smile and say, thank you. I remember a friend of mine who's a photographer. She'll show somebody a photograph and they're like, hey, what camera did you use to take that? And she gets so annoyed because she said, no one ever has a great meal and then goes, hey, chef, what stove did you cook that on? As implying that the camera or the stove made the picture or the meal. And the same thing was, you're a good speaker because you're natural. It's just easy for you. You didn't have to work at it. I
always try to gamify everything and say that, hey, if I am a character in the book or I'm a character in the game, I need to have certain skills or certain soft and hard skills to be able to fight the boss, right? Like the level 88 boss. And I know that I can fight that boss only when I am a right level in the game, like I'm level 100. So I need 60 years or 10 years to get there. But I'm thinking this in advance to be able to develop the skills that I need to actually fight that boss later, right? And I see very often that, like, I work with a social media manager, for example, or a copywriter, and they always develop a certain skill set, right? Hey, I'm great in copywriting, but they're not going 1-2 skills further, right? Like, what's going to be after that, right? Like, what's going to happen after that? Okay. You want to be just a copywriter, or you want to be a copywriter? Especially with ChatGPT, a lot of people are going, you got to bring something else to the table these days. Yeah. Exactly. Like, what is additional value proposition that you have, right? And then very often you don't, develop that. And that's why a lot of people changing professions, right? Because like they say, hey, I was doing copywriting or I was doing graphic design it didn't work for me. I'm trying something else, right? Instead of just not just repackaging, but adding additional values. Like, hey, I am, for example, graphic designer. Hey, can I do UI UX design as well? If I can I be a good product manager, right? I can be a good product manager with the knowledge of UI UX design. Then can I lead the team, right? Or then can I teach? Can I present?
Right.
Can I do that in a different languages? Something that also stuck with me when I was listening to the book, there was a sales process. And then in that sales process, Diane mentioned to Ben, these are two characters from the book, that you always start with the gut, then you move to heart, and then you move to head, right? Yes. And I was thinking about this and all these popular brands that are out there that we interface with every day. So what would you say are the best examples of that kind of sales strategy or sales approach, moving from a gut to a head?
Well, let's give the context of that, which is the old way of trying to get people to buy from you is, you got to get people to know, like, and trust you. We've heard that 100 times. But I flipped it and said, it's not about, because when you believe that you got to get people to know you first before they buy from you, that causes the behavior of pushing out facts and figures. So I flip the script and say, no, the first thing is trust. It's a gut thing. Is this email safe to open? Did I get a warm introduction? Are you giving me eye contact? That's how you build trust. And then it goes from the gut to the heart, which is, do I like you? And the more empathy you show in your problem description, the more they think you have your solution. And then it goes to the head. And there's an unspoken question that everybody has, which is, will this work for me? They might trust and like you, but if they don't think it's going to work for them, they're not going to buy or hire you. And that's where the storytelling is so powerful, because if you told a story where they see themselves in the story, they think, oh, this worked for me too, because that person sounds a lot like me. So I think there's some brands that are doing great jobs of that. You see a lot of that in the Super Bowl commercial. Kia had one where there was an electric car, and you're like, okay, there's a lot of electric cars out there. What's going to be different? And they had an electric dog chasing the electric car, and the dog jumps in midair and runs out of electricity, and the driver of the electric car recharges the dog, and the dog comes back to life. So the hero in that story is clearly the driver of the electric car. And we know dogs chase cars, but everyone, so it's taking an inanimate object like an electric car and making you feel something, with the driver being the hero. So I think that's a great example of gut, heart, head all coming together.
Do you think that sometimes you just lose the story because you're focusing more on clicks, on conversions, on banners, on the technical aspects, right? Because I work with a lot of advertisers, and things are very technical these days. So you can create the best messaging, the best banner, but then the settings in your Facebook ad account are off, and then things are not looking at you at all. And I know, especially, and again, so where is that line between creating a story and then conversions and budgets and banners and A/B testing?
Well, I think what you're testing is this story resonating more than that story? But if you're testing what statistic is more compelling versus the other statistic, I don't think those will be as successful as the one that makes us feel something. Because remember, in my humble opinion, a good ad is one that makes you feel something and that you can remember and repeat and become brand ambassadors. And really good advertising creates those brand ambassadors, because then you start sharing it with your friends. Oh my God, you got to watch, like the Dollar Shave Club became a successful brand because it was hilarious. And you're basically sharing a joke, a funny, making your friends laugh. And, that's how they broke through the clutter of all this Gillette and things. And I think Gillette ended up buying them. But in the early days, they were breaking through the clutter with really good storytelling.
Do you think that some stories should die for the new ones to be born? Let me give you an example. Like all of these movies that you make, remaking, relaunching. Yeah. Why is that? Why do you think it's just? Why is that? Why we are not looking for new stories, creating new characters, but we are revamping?
Because for Hollywood, it's a proven brand awareness. So they have way less money they have to spend to get people to know what the brand is. And if you loved it the first time, maybe you'll like it the second time. And maybe even if you don't, well, Sex and the City, same thing, right? Now there's a reboot. There were all 3 movies after the TV series. If people have an emotional connection to a brand, like Will and Grace, the TV show, they came back and I enjoyed it just as much the second time as I did the first time. But not every sequel works or not every reboot works. And a lot of it is, can you capture that magic again? And do you have something new to say? Like Jerry Seinfeld's like, we're leaving at the top of the game. We're not going to wait till we're asked to leave, no matter how much money you're giving me. I want to leave while people still feel good about this show.
I was thinking about leaving the game when you're the winner. You just mentioned that. Like, if you still have that energy going and if you feel like you're losing that, then maybe it's a time for you to move on with something else and not stick to that, to that same project and trying to reinvent yourself or rethink it, etc. For those business leaders that are listening to this, that are stuck. So is it like, do you need to keep on working, reinventing your story, or you can just kind of write an ending and then move on and open up a new book and sort of like and start something new that is more exciting, more passionate?
I think that's so specific to whatever it is you're doing. There's brands like Coca-Cola that have been around for decades. They're not going to go anywhere. They've come up with new Coke, old Coke. Not everything they try to stay fresh works, but they're obviously not going to say we're out of storylines about what Coke is doing. There's enough brand equity and emotional potential that they should continue to figure out ways to keep the brand relevant and fresh versus giving up.
I had an opposite opinion about, like just giants in general. Take, Netflix into account, right? When Netflix was still small and they had a small production budget, they could actually release really good shows, right? They were really good, nice watching. Now their production budgets are insane, right? You spend millions of dollars per episode or per show, right? And what's happening is that they're releasing the shows, they're very expensive, they're not working for them, and then it's a closed cycle. And they have the volume, they have the platform. So if they continue reinventing yourself, we're going to be seeing more and more shitty content instead of just opening up for new players that might be like A24. If they have a platform, maybe they would release something else.
Well, it's interesting to watch all of that because now Apple's in the game, Amazon's in the game. I was watching a stand-up comedian on Amazon. And she's like, you didn't pay for this. It's part of your Prime. So the content doesn't have to be that great. She's saying out loud what some people might think, right? But Disney Plus, obviously that was a big investment for them. That's now a huge source of revenue for them to try and compensate for the whole disruption in people not watching a lot of network TV anymore, and they own ABC. So they've had to figure out how we're going to repurpose that. I think when you have big brands like that, nothing is forever. And companies like Blockbuster and Kodak, we assume that, there always will be a Meta. They changed their name from Facebook to Meta. Not necessarily. Right. There'll always be a Netflix. People thought there was always going to be a Blockbuster. Not necessarily. So we'll see how it all plays out. Those things typically have more to do with thinking that the old way of doing something is going to continue to work. Like film is always going to be Kodak. Blockbuster thought people will always come and rent movies. And by the time they tried to pivot to streaming, they had run out of money to compete with Netflix. Some of it's management, some of it's holding on to the past too long. But it has more to do with the business model, I think, than the storytelling.
What do you think we didn't discuss today about the storytelling? What do you think the listeners should hear and I didn't ask you?
Well, there's one thing that I want to give people, which is my 5-5-5 method that I've created, which is how to be more resilient when we get knocked down by life or disappointed or hurt feelings. Like if somebody cuts you off in traffic, I've seen some people lose their mind, right? So you zoom out, you think to yourself, will this matter in 5 minutes? How about 5 hours? How about 5 days from now? If you're still upset about somebody cutting you off in traffic, 5 days from now, your life has got some problems. And it really helps. I introduced this concept to a lot of companies and teams. And so when they lose a big sale, they're like, okay, we're going to 5-5-5 this. We're going to complain about it for 5 hours, and then we're never going to talk about it again. Because how can we be fresh and ready for the next potential client if we're still rehashing something 5 days from now and getting back up fast? Now, in my personal life, I wish I had this tool when my dad died 10 years ago. I could go back to my younger self and say, 5 days from now, yeah, you're still going to be really sad and you're going to miss him. So let's do it again. So 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years from now. Okay, so 5 years from now, you'll still miss your dad, but you won't be this sad. So the 5-5-5 method is a great way of telling yourself a different story, both in your personal and in your business life.
The same way you're coping with the challenge that you have and understanding the importance of it in 5-5-5, you also can think about yourself in terms of your personal growth, 5-5-5, right? Like, what is something that is the things that I'm doing right now, they're going to be still important for me in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years,
right? And
who I'll be there, right? And it's very interesting because it's also the habitual thing. So for example, like, am I eating healthy enough? Like who I am in 5 years if I'm eating like this, or am I sleeping enough, or I'm taking care of myself, right? Or am I investing in this relationship enough, or in my business relationship, or in my
your
profession,
retirement
right?
saving.
Like,
yeah,
exactly, right? Interesting. Just to close up, John, you're mainly doing right now speaking, consulting, training. Can you speak about if folks wanted to contact you, obviously, and get to work with you? So what areas you currently focusing on a daily basis and you're spending more of your time on?
The majority of my focus is working with heads of marketing and sales who are looking for a sales keynote speaker for a kickoff meeting. And some of them want to have ongoing training after the talk, or with a workshop or an online course. And then some clients want to work with me one-on-one, and they can reach out and discuss what that could look like. And just find everything on my website, johnlivesay.com. And if you can't remember that, just Google The Pitch Whisperer and all my content shows up there.
Awesome. John, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Thanks for reading the book and listening to the book and asking such thoughtful questions.
I appreciate what you're doing for the sales from the standpoint, not being very linear about it, but actually going it in a very creative manner. So I appreciate you for that.
Nice. My pleasure. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, John.